Hey everybody, how's it going? Jesus Ramirez from the Photoshop Training Channel here. I see that we already have people in the room. Wow, we have people from a lot of places. We have people from Scotland, Mexico, India, more people from India, Canada. Hi everybody, thank you for being here. Let me make sure that I have everything ready to go here, and it looks like we're streaming and everything is good, so we can get started. So I hope everybody's having a good Friday. It's a Friday morning for me, maybe a little later in the day for you. As you may already know, I am in the San Francisco Bay Area. So we're gonna do what we've been doing lately, which is I'm gonna show you a Photoshop tip. Then I'm gonna review some composites and then answer any questions you may have. So why don't we get started with the tip? So today I'm gonna use Photoshop 3D, and the reason is that the next tutorial that I will publish on Monday will be on Photoshop 3D. So this is something that is not in the tutorial, but I still think it's cool and I think you guys will enjoy. So what I'm going to do is work in Photoshop, of course. Oh, and one thing I need to mention is that if you're in an older version of CS6, unfortunately this will not work since the layout and the way 3D works is different. But anyway, I'm just going to create a new document, and the document size is really not that important, but I'm creating a 1920 by 1080 document, and there it is. And I'm just going to create a blank layer and go into 3D, new mesh from layer, mesh preset, and select sphere. And that, of course, will give us a sphere. There it is. I can rotate around it in 3D space with the Move tool selected, and I can click on these icons here on the bottom left to rotate, pan, and all that fun stuff. By the way, when I'm working in 3D, I like having my left hand. I'm right-handed, so my left hand is on the keyboard. So I have my fingers on the M key from our key tool, so I can hide the 3D elements, and V to bring them back. So M and V, that way I can work quicker. And what I want to talk about today is actually sort of like a layer mask for 3D objects. So I'm going to double click on the 3D object to open it up. If I click on the sphere material rather, you're going to see all these different options for the material. One of those options is the opacity. So notice that if I bring down the opacity, it makes the sphere see-through, but we can actually apply a texture to that opacity, so you can think of it as a layer mask. So I'm going to go into new texture and press OK. Then I'm going to bring in a texture that I already have here. So I'm going to go into File, Place Embedded, and there's this pattern right here. It's a seamless pattern. So I'm just going to make sure that it goes all the way around to the edges. There it is. And just like a layer mask, anything that is white, it's going to show. Anything that is black will not show. So I'm going to close it and save it. Press OK. And notice that design there around that sphere. So it's using that 2D graphic as a mask, so to speak, to decide what to show and not to show in that 3D object. Notice the shadows reflect the design that I incorporated, and since it's a seamless pattern, there are no hard edges. And I can open it up again by going into the material in the 3D panel, then going into this icon under opacity and select edit texture, and I can invert it by pressing Control I, Command I on the Mac. Then I can save it, and now we have a similar looking pattern, but now as the inverted version of it. So you can work with seamless patterns in 3D, apply them to 3D objects, and they will give you this really cool looking effect. And of course, you can create, you can actually bring it in a background. So I'm going to just find a background really quick here. I'm just going to drag this in and just see how this looks. So I'm going to drag in this background. This is an Adobe stock image. And there it is. And I'm going to hit enter, select my 3D object. And if you watched this YouTube channel before, you know that one of the best ways of making sure that a foreground element matches a background element is to have the same perspective. And you do so by matching the horizon line. So if you follow all the converging lines, they end up at a horizon right about here. That is where the ground plane meets the sky. Now, this is not a flat horizon. It's actually going down and up. So the horizon line is not this line right here. It's actually just a little bit lower than that, and you can find that out by following these lines. But even if you match this line here, you'll still be doing much better than most. So no worries on just being lazy and selecting that area. So I'm just gonna click and drag down and just go just a little lower than that. Maybe pan this down and go a little higher. Actually, I went too low. So something like that. And then I can dolly that out. And of course I could move it around. So then now my 3D object is in the scene. There it is. What I'm going to do now is select the background, press Control A, Command A on the Mac to make a selection around the entire canvas, and then Control C, Command C to copy, go back into my 3D model, and I'm going to disable the selection by pressing Control D, Command D. Under Environment, I'm going to change the IBL, Image Based Light, and go into New Texture, press OK, then open it up. So I'm going to go into Edit Texture and paste it. Control V, Command V to paste, and I can close it. And now that light or that image is creating the light in the scene, and it should help this look a little more realistic. So you can kind of see that some of the blue there on the 3D model, and to show you that it is, and to show you that that image is really interacting with the 3D model, I'm going to remove the texture from the diffuse. Diffuse is simply the color or texture for the 3D model. So I'm going to remove that and change the diffuse to black, and then increase the reflection. And you'll see now that that is reflecting the 3D environment. So I can click on Environment, select the Move tool, and rotate around, and you'll see how those clouds and the rest of the image is affecting our 3D model. I'm going to go back into the 3D layer, and I can press M for the marquee tool, click and drag around that 3D model and render it. And rendering will give you a better representation of what this is actually looking like, but of course rendering will take some time. I'm not going to let it render, of course, so I'm just going to hit the Escape key to cancel the rendering. And the last thing I'm going to show you is that you have to match the lighting. So I'm going to select the infinite light, select the move tool, and click around. And this is another reason why you want to have it in perspective, because the ground plane is catching those shadows. And actually, I'll show you one more thing. If you accidentally move your 3D model and it's under the ground plane, you can select your 3D model and click on the property or coordinates icon and click on Move to Ground Plane, and it moves it like right on top of the ground plane. And you can of course rotate and scale and do all that sort of fun stuff on here. But anyway, since it's in perspective and I can move it up and down, it looks like it's going further into the road and coming back. And you know, once you have the perspective, you can move it any way you want and it looks more realistic. And one thing I didn't mention about the light, the infinite light, if you click on this icon here, you can actually adjust the softness of the shadow. So you can kind of see the shadow here on the ground, on the road, and I can soften it up so it's not so sharp. And then I can, once again, make a selection with the marquee tool, click on the render button, and it will render the image. It'll smooth out the shadows and make sure that the reflections are looking nicer. So that's the tip I had for you today, using black and white images to create essentially 3D models. So you're using black to hide, white to reveal, much like you would on a layer mask. And of course, this works on all kinds of 3D models, not just spheres. So if I create another layer, go into 3D, new mesh from layer, mesh preset, I can do something like, let's see, what can we do? We can do something like, let's try the cube, right? Even better yet, let's do the postcard. So I'm going to do a postcard, and the postcard you really can't see here because I have two 3D layers. So when you want to have two 3D models in one 3D layer, you got to have them one on top of the other, and then press Control E, Command E on the Mac to merge down. So now they're both in here, and I don't know where that second mesh went, but we'll try to find it. and it's somewhere here. Might be transparent. I don't know why I can't see it. Oh well, let me see. Yeah, see, sometimes these things act so weird. So then, let's see. I'm actually kind of glad this is happening, because then now we can troubleshoot together. So I don't know where that 3D layer went. So let's find it. Let's go into, and before I move the camera, I'm gonna go into current view and save it, because I don't want to lose it. So I'm gonna go and save this view, and just call it final. Press OK. That way, when I move the camera around, we can come back to that same view by going into final, and it places it there. But for some reason, I think this might be why. Let me remove the texture, and there it is. Yeah, so I had a texture that was totally transparent, so it was hiding that. It was hiding that 3D model. But I can do the same thing. I can go back into my opacity, and I'll remove the texture, because I don't even know what's in that texture, and I'll just add new texture, press OK, and I can do the same thing. I can click and drag that seamless pattern onto it, save it, and then we should have that pattern on that new 3D model there. So that one might be a little too big, so I'm going to scale it down, and I'll do that same trick by going into the coordinates and clicking on move to ground plane, and then I could just rotate it, and there it is. So now I have two 3D models interacting with each other that have that same pattern. And this one is not as reflective, so I'll change the diffuse to black, so the color is diffuse, and then increase the reflection, and there you go. I'm gonna render that part of it as well. So now this is also reflecting the sphere, because they're both in the same 3D layer. All right, so I haven't really been looking at the chat pod, so let me bring that up and see what you guys have been saying. And as I've mentioned this before, for some reason YouTube doesn't show the comments after this is posted as a regular video, so I'll bring this in so that you guys can see some of the comments. And hello everybody from all kinds of places, Bangladesh, Holland, India, and Germany. Awesome. West Virginia, Pakistan, France. I was just in France for the first time this year, and I loved it. I was in Paris, I believe it was in March. So that's pretty cool. West Virginia. Awesome. So Anthony, I can use 3D stuff on CC 2017. That's, I think, a good question. So if you have a version of Photoshop that is CS6 extended or newer, and you either don't see the 3D button or is disabled, that's because your computer doesn't meet the minimum requirements for 3D. So that's the problem if you guys can't access a 3D menu, but you do have a newer version of Photoshop. Yeah, so a lot of people are saying that their 3D option is grayed out. That's the reason. It's the minimum requirement. Your computer doesn't meet the minimum requirements for 3D in Photoshop. Somebody's saying, which PC do I use? I have, I believe it's a 4.0 i7 with 64 gigabytes of RAM and 8 gigabytes of video memory. So yeah, you got to make sure that you're. Oh, look, we have Colin Smith from Photoshop Cafe. Hey, Colin. So check out Colin Smith. He also has a YouTube channel. He has Photoshop tutorials just like I do. So check him out, Photoshop Cafe. And there he is, Photoshop Cafe. So check out his channel. So yeah, so now that we've completed the little mini tutorial for today, why don't we move on to some of the composite reviews that we're gonna do today. Some of you have submitted composites for me to critique, and let me get to those so that we could check them out. And this time I was a little less prepared than last time, so I just threw them all into a folder, and I am so sorry I don't have the artist names, so you're gonna have to apologize for that. I usually like to name people's names that submitted, but this time I was in a bit of a hurry, so I just threw everything in a folder. Also, I gotta mention that if I forgot to include your review or your composite for me to critique, please send me an email and remind me. If you haven't sent me one already and you would like for me to critique your composites, sign up to my newsletter. And from my newsletter, I send out an email reminding people to send me things in. And that's also the email that I usually check. I had people tagging me on Instagram and different social media accounts, and that's really not efficient for me. So it's much easier for me to just get an email from you that says, use this for your next composite critique, and I just save that onto a folder. But on social media, it just requires so much more work that it's just not efficient for me. So if you're gonna send me something, please send it via email. Anyway, I'm gonna close these files since we don't need them anymore, and we're gonna get started with the composites here. And actually, the way that I'll do it is I'll just drag files onto here. So I have a couple here to review. So let me start with this one. I'm not really sure what was composited in a lot of these, since they're just regular JPEGs, but it looks like they just took a picture of the actor and placed them on the background, maybe added that eagle there. And overall, this composite's pretty good. I really don't have too many things to say about it. I actually have more things to say about the text. I don't feel that it goes with the composite. Also, this is a little harder to read, so I would work a little more on the text and make sure that it's legible. Also, this highlight here is just, again, it doesn't go with the scene. It's too bright. Maybe try to do something where and I'm going to try to fake this really quick, where you actually blend it more into the scene. So maybe something, I'm really trying to fake this. It probably won't look that good right away, but hopefully you get the idea. So we have, let me just duplicate that, and I'll do it really, really quick here. So maybe we have the secondary highlight, and I probably would do something maybe with overlay or soft light or a different blending mode that blends it more into the image, and maybe bring down the opacity or do something like that where it just isn't so bright. Maybe just reducing the opacity would do the job on that end there. So I would mess around with that and see what works. Also, it looks like the masking might be a little off here on the hoodie, so I would work on that a little more. But overall, I think it's a good composite. I mean, just by looking at it, I really don't see too much wrong with it. Maybe the one other thing that I would add is maybe something that unifies the entire composite as a whole. So maybe add a selective color adjustment layer, go into the blacks, and maybe add a little bit of yellow, and maybe reduce the cyan or something like that, just to unify these shadows on all the elements in the scene. But overall, I think it's a good composite. So yeah, good job. Let's see what we have now. We have a Captain America shield. And so the first thing, and again, this is the first time I look a lot of these at these, so I'm not really sure of what was composited in, or how they were made. So I'm just basing my opinions on whatever I see on screen here. And the first thing I have to say is that I would maybe add some of the texture that the Captain America shield has onto the logo back here, onto this other circular shield logo thing. I'm not sure what that is. But this has a lot of texture and all that, so maybe I would try to match that, because this looks like essentially a red vector, and this one has a lot more content. So I would try to match some of the texture, just because I think it looks pretty cool on the right, but then it looks much plainer on the left. So I would work with that. But overall, I think it's a good composite. I like these little elements here. That's really cool. So yeah, so this one's pretty good. I would just say simply match the texture on this red logo, and you'll have a much better composite. Also, the one other thing that I'm just noticing now, I kind of don't like how this is broken up. It just looks too fake. So maybe even go online and look for a crack in a wall or something, and then just apply that so it seems more natural. And then that's how you define the edge, and maybe add a little more thickness, right? Because this is, after all, a shield, and it looks like it's not that thick. So maybe add some of the thickness on the shield. And also, this will be for the previous example as well. Notice the highlight here on the text, how it's blending in better into the text. So that's sort of what I was talking about. It's not just like a white highlight. It's actually blending in the scene and blending in the text. So that's a good example of how I would have maybe done something with that highlight there on the end. And somebody said, oh, Colin Smith is Hydra. Other people said it's Hydra. You know what? I feel embarrassed because I'm a big comic book fan and I don't know what that is. So that's actually quite a bit embarrassing. Usually when I watch Marvel movies, I'm like, did you hear what that guy said? That is this, or that is somebody's cousin or whatever. And I couldn't believe I didn't know what Hydra was. All right. So let's see what the next composite is. And actually, it looks like we have another Captain America. This one actually is a PSD, so that's pretty cool because we can actually see how this person created this composite. So let's check it out. So they started out with a Captain America shield, and they have this background. So it looks like the background also already included the text. So I'm not sure if this person just flattened everything for me and then just send it to me this way, or they just found this background somewhere. So I'm not really sure what they did on that front, but let's see what they got here. I'll leave the watermark off just so that we can enjoy the composite. All right, so again, for those of you that have been watching some of these composite critiques, you probably have seen this already, but one of the things that I like to do is, on top of everything, is just create a black and white adjustment layer just so I could get rid of the color and just look at the contrast and luminance values of the image. And when you do that, you'll see that this little boy doesn't really match the background, right? There's a lot of things that are either too bright or too dark compared to the background. So by simply matching the luminance values or making them look more similar, the composite should look better. So there he is. I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer. Click on this icon to clip it to the layer below it, and then I can adjust the, did I get the right layer? Yeah, I did. So I'm just going to adjust this so that it matches more. I think the boy might be a little too bright, so I'm just going to darken them up just to match the background a little bit better. And then I don't want the blacks to be so dark, so I'm just going to click and drag this to the right, and then just keep fine-tuning it so that it matches the background better. So that's before and after, and if I disable the black and white adjustment layer, you can see now the difference. So he should match more with his background, and always look for that. Always look for the luminance values matching on all your elements in your composite so that they fit on the actual scene. And sort of what I did earlier, actually in this case, I think I kind of like the color of the red in the background and those colors. So maybe I would match the little boy to have some of those reds. So I would use a selective color adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below it. In the blacks, reduce the cyan to add red. And by the way, if you're wondering why reducing cyan adds red, that is just how RGB works. Adobe does a much better job of showing the relationships of these colors on the color balance adjustment layer. So you can kind of see here how cyan is related to red, magenta is related to green, and yellow is related to blue. So they're the opposite colors. So the opposite of red is cyan, and so on and so forth. So in the selective color adjustment layer, we don't have that nicely labeled, but it works the same way. So if I reduce cyan, I get red. So see how the shadows are getting darker, and I can increase the blacks to make those shadows darker. But anyway, so I would adjust the colors on the little boy to sort of match the background as well. Somebody asked a question, can you import 3D models into Photoshop? DXF files. I'm not sure if you can import DSX files, but you can import OBJs. So that was a 3D question that related to our first example. But anyway, so with this composite, overall, I think it looks pretty good, but I would just work on the color and luminance values for the little boy and obviously for the shield as well. So besides those two things, I'm not going to comment on the background just because I'm not sure if the person who submitted this actually made that themselves or they just found it online. But in terms of adding the little boy to the background, that's what I would focus on. Just making sure that the colors match the background and that the luminance values match the background so that it looks like he fits in. So that's before the quick adjustments that I made, and this is after. So you can see how just by making those tiny little tweaks, the image looks a little bit better. All right, let's see what else we have here. Give me 1 second. I lost my folder, and there it is. So I'm not really sure what this is. Let's see. Oh, what I'll do now is I'll just close these images and just open that one again from scratch. Cool. All right, so let's see. Again, this is the first time I look at some of these, so I'm not really sure what's going on. All right, so it looks like this person had the right ideas. I like how we have this light, and it's obviously affecting, I guess she's a witch, this witch. And also that light is affecting the bird, and all that's really cool. But the problem, again, is you'll notice that the luminance values don't really match. Look how dark and how black her hood is there in the top of her face compared to everything else in the scene. You know, like that really doesn't match. And if we do the black and white adjustment layer trick again, you'll see the same thing. It makes it more obvious. Just notice how dark she is, or basically most of her body, not even all her body, just a lot of her body compared to the rest of the image. So that really doesn't match. So again, you got to make sure that your luminance values match. So I would just, you know, do something like this. Obviously, this is not the ideal way of doing it. You would be working with layers, but, you know, just make sure that everything matches when you're working in Photoshop. Luminance, saturation, and all those things. But anyway, so oops, I wasn't painting because I was on multiply, and I'll bring the opacity, and I was like, why isn't that painting? All right, here we go. So now I'm going to try to just quickly match the luminance a little bit. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but it should be good enough. So maybe something like that. So see how just by making sure the luminance matches, she doesn't stick out as much. The other thing that I mentioned was saturation. So the saturation on this image is not really matching. And if you create a saturation map, and I have a tutorial on this on YouTube, so if you don't catch it now, on YouTube, I have a tutorial that I go deeper into the saturation. So you can create a selective color adjustment layer, select absolute, and then from reds to magentas, all of those bring down the blacks to -100, and then from whites to neutrals, +100. And I have a saturation map preset, that way I don't have to spend time creating it. But the way this works is that anything that is bright has a lot of saturation, anything that is dark does not. So you'll see that there's a lot of saturation right here and right on her face, and it doesn't really match the rest of the scene either. So you would create something like a hue and saturation adjustment layer, bring down the saturation, and notice that just by bringing down the saturation, it actually looks more realistic already. But I'm really trying to match it, not bring it down throughout the whole image. So what I'll do is I'll just paint with white on that hue and saturation adjustment layer, something like that, and maybe even up here. So now notice that the black and white image looks more realistic, and that's of course created by the saturation map. So that's before and after, and of course I could adjust it. But anyway, so you gotta make sure saturation matches, luminosity matches, and yeah. So I think those are the biggest issues with this composite. So they're not too hard to fix. Once you know what you're looking for, a lot of times you can fix them really easily yourself. And let's see what we have next. I think we have one more. Let me just close this and open it up straight from here. Oh, that's pretty cool. Infinity War, Avengers. Let me zoom in. So again, I'm not really sure what was composited in and what wasn't. I would assume that the fire here was composited around that graphic and also the text. No, sort of the same thing I said earlier about the first composite. The text is a little harder to read, so I would work on that. Maybe bigger text, thicker text, or the background needs to somehow contrast the text. So that's the biggest issues I see with this image, just making sure that it all matches. Also, for some reason, I don't think that fire matches this scene. Maybe I would make the fire more yellow. And the reason I'm saying doesn't match the scene is because I'm looking at the fire above his head, and then these comets or whatever they are just raining down on, it looks like a city in the background. So that fire doesn't really match this fire. So I would just try to make sure that they're closer, at least in color. But overall, I think it's a good composite. Again, it's a little hard to give opinions and thoughts if I'm not really sure what the person did. So, and by the way, if you send something in and you have a PSD, that's even better. or at least in the email say what you put in yourself, just because it's a little difficult for me to give you advice if I'm not sure what you actually did, because maybe I don't know if you found this Earth image online or you made it in Photoshop, so it's helpful if I know what you guys did. But it looks like, yeah, so it looks like that is it. So let me just close this and bring up the chat pod and see if you guys have any questions. Let me scroll up. And I'll bring this over. How long is this video going to be? I don't know. It's already been, I think, 30 minutes. So around that long. Hi from Germany. Yes, this video will be posted later. Hello from West Virginia. Thank you. Hello from Hungary. So are people discussing the video card? So yeah, you do need a good video card and a computer with enough memory to run Photoshop. So if you are just tuning in and you didn't hear what I said earlier, if you don't see the 3D menu or it's grayed out and you have the latest version of Photoshop, that's because your computer doesn't have the minimum requirements. And yeah, so one of the questions is, how can they send in a picture? Once again, you can go into my email newsletter. I usually send out an email reminding people. Let me show you where that is if you don't know. So let me just type in, you can go to my website, Photoshop Training Channel, and you can just enter your email address there and you'll get an email notification every time I put up a new tutorial. And also whenever I'm planning on going live. As of right now, the plan is publishing new tutorials on Mondays and Wednesdays and then doing a live video on Fridays. So I think this is my 4th or 5th one. You can catch the replays on YouTube if you miss them. Talking about YouTube, actually, before we go into YouTube, if you haven't watched this tutorial, check it out. It's a tutorial on making sure that everything is in perspective. So you can place anything like on a billboard, or the side of a wall, a cell phone or whatever. And it's a trick that I came up with when I was working as a designer, and I haven't seen anyone do it on YouTube. So I think at the very least, it's something that you haven't seen before. So check it out. So on YouTube, let me go to my YouTube channel. If you want to see the previous live recordings, you can just click on playlist. And here we go, live session recordings. We have 6, so this is the 7th. Another thing I want to mention is if you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, make sure you click on the subscribe button and also click on the notifications little bell that should be around here somewhere. I don't see it because it's my channel, but if you come into my YouTube channel, there should be a little bell that notifies you, that when you click it, it notifies you when I publish a new tutorial. So I would really appreciate if you click on that bell. And we were just talking about Colin Smith, who is one of my friends, and that's what I was talking about, that little bell. So feel free to subscribe and click on that little bell, and feel free to subscribe to Colin as well. One of the questions is, how long have you been doing Photoshop and what inspired you? I've been doing Photoshop for, what year are we in? I don't know. It's been over 10 years. I don't know, 13 years, something like that. And what inspired me, even though it wasn't obvious from the critique today, because I didn't know what the Hydra logo was, I was and am a big comic book fan. So I used to draw a lot of Spider-Man, just on paper. And then I got the bright idea of taking it into Photoshop and, sort of painting it and adding textures and stuff like that. And actually, not last week, but a couple weeks ago, I showed one of my first composites. So if you go back to the playlist, you'll see one of my very, very first composites. So you can go to live session recordings, and there it is. And I'm gonna disable the sound and just fast forward to my first composite. So there it is. That is the very first composite I ever did. As you can see, it's I was amazing from day one. No, just kidding. It's terrible. Watch that video and you'll see what I have to say about my first composite. But anyway, yeah. So what inspired me was comic books. I just like drawing comic books, and I like I used to like taking them into Photoshop and then just paint them and do things with it. And then that's sort of how it evolved. And a whole bunch of people from joining in. We got people from Philly, Belize, Canada. All right, so it's already 10 o'clock, guys, and I have to go. I need to, as you notice, I'm slightly better dressed than I usually am. I usually wear a t-shirt, but I have somewhere I gotta be in about 30 minutes. So unless there's no other important questions, I'll talk to you later. I'll be publishing a new tutorial on Monday, which will be on 3D. Similar topic, but different thing than what I showed you today. That one will actually include some animation and video and animated GIFs and all that fun stuff. So I'll be publishing that on Monday morning. If you haven't already, subscribe to my newsletter, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on that little bell to get notifications whenever I publish some stuff. All right, guys, it looks like there's no more questions. So thank you so much for watching, and I will be talking to you again very soon. Bye-bye.